My brother stood up at a family dinner and called me a failure in front of everyone. I just said, okay, and let them laugh. Months later, his entire wedding collapsed because of his own lies, and I became the only person who could fix it. It was Thanksgiving, and our family had gathered at my parents' house in suburban Atlanta. The smell of roasted turkey, candied yams, and pumpkin pie filled the air. Our dining table stretched across the living room, covered in a crisp white cloth, candles lit along the center, and my mother bustling around, fussing over every last detail. Brandon had always been the flashy one. 6 years older than me, handsome, charismatic, and the golden child in our parents' eyes. He had a lucrative career in real estate, drove a new Tesla, and had friends who hung on his every word. Me. Jessica, 30, still living in the same apartment I rented downtown, working as a mid-level coordinator at a small marketing firm, driving a 10-year-old Honda Civic, quietly paying my bills, and keeping to myself. I had been content with my life. Until that night. The dinner started normally. My cousins bragged about promotions, new houses, vacations abroad. My mother smiled proudly. Brandon, of course, was charming everyone with stories of his latest real estate deals and how he had just closed another big sale. Then, halfway through the meal, he decided to make a grand announcement. He stood up, glass in hand, a smug grin on his face. "I think it's time we recognize the stars of the family," he said loudly. Everyone looked toward him, smiling, assuming he was about to toast the holiday. "Look at all the accomplishments we have here. Emily got her MBA, Uncle Greg just sold his first investment property, Aunt Linda's bakery is booming. Even my little nephew Tyler is breaking records in his soccer league." He paused, scanning the table with a dramatic glance. Then his eyes landed on me. "And then there's Jessica." A few people chuckled, expecting a compliment. But I knew him better than that. He took a deep breath, as if preparing for a performance. "You might not know this, but Jessica here has struggled a lot." Murmurs spread across the table. I could feel everyone's eyes on me, my mother's hand tightening around her fork. Well, let's just say she hasn't exactly kept up with the rest of the family. She's had jobs here and there. Nothing lasting. Always renting. Never moving forward. Brandon smiled at the audience, expecting laughter. And of course, he got it. Then came the words I will never forget. "She's a failure," he said, loud and clear, letting the word hang in the room like a heavy curtain. I froze. My throat tightened. My hands gripped my fork. My heart raced. The laughter erupted, just as he had predicted. Some cousins whispered to each other, giggling. My mother's face paled. My sister, Amanda, looked down at her plate, clearly uncomfortable. I should have yelled. I should have stormed out. I should have defended myself. But I didn't. I simply said, "Okay." And I let them laugh. The silence that followed my response seemed to unnerve Brandon more than any argument would have. He blinked, confused, like he didn't understand why I wasn't crumbling. He had expected tears, a fight, anything, but nothing came. I stood up, picked up my bag, and left the room calmly. I didn't slam the door. I didn't cry in front of them. I didn't even raise my voice. I just walked away. The drive home in my old Honda was quiet. The familiar streets of Atlanta rolled past me as I tried to process the humiliation. Once inside my apartment, I sank onto the couch and let the tears come. 4 hours, I cried. Until my chest ached. Until my eyes burned. And then, as dawn broke over the city, a new feeling emerged. Determination. Brandon had tried to define me as a failure in front of everyone. Fine. Let him. I was done letting his words control my life. I started small. I applied for every job I could find in marketing and event planning, positions that challenged me and pushed me outside of my comfort zone. I polished my resume, updated my LinkedIn profile, and even invested in a professional headshot. 2 weeks later, I got an email from Southern Event Solutions, a prominent wedding and corporate event planning company based in Atlanta. They were looking for an administrative coordinator with experience managing large projects. My application had apparently caught their attention. I scheduled an interview. I prepared for days, rehearsing answers, researching the company, memorizing the names of their top clients. On the morning of the interview, I wore my favorite navy blazer and black pumps. I looked in the mirror and straightened my posture. "You're not a failure," I whispered to myself. "You're just getting started." The interview went better than I could have imagined. I answered questions confidently, shared examples of how I managed complex projects, and even offered ideas for improving workflow. The hiring manager, a sharp woman named Laura Bennett, smiled and said, "You have a quiet strength, Jessica. That's rare in this industry." 2 days later, I received the offer. It wasn't a fortune, but it was enough. More importantly, it was the first step toward rebuilding my confidence. Over the next few months, I proved myself. I handled corporate events with professionalism, coordinated high-profile weddings, and managed clients who were more demanding than anyone I had ever worked with. My reputation grew. My confidence grew. And all the while, Brandon and my family had no idea how much I had changed. Then, the call came that would change everything. It was a Saturday morning, and my phone rang. The caller ID showed Mom. My heart sank. "Jessica," she said, her voice trembling. "You need to come to the house. Brandon. He's in trouble. Big trouble." I frowned. "What kind of trouble?" She hesitated. "It's his wedding. Patricia called it off. She found out about his lies." I froze. Brandon had been engaged to Patricia Reynolds, a nurse from Marietta. She was kind, patient, and beautiful. They had planned their wedding for months, with everything meticulously scheduled. And now it was collapsing, all because of Brandon's lies. "Mom, what does he want from me?" I asked cautiously. "He says he's the only one who can fix this," she admitted. "He said, you're the only one he trusts to save the wedding." I stared at my phone. I couldn't believe it. The same brother who had humiliated me months ago, who had called me a failure in front of everyone, was now begging me to fix the biggest mess of his life. I didn't answer right away. I let her words sink in. Then I made my decision. I would help. Not for him. Not for the wedding. But for me. Because Brandon had underestimated me once. And I was about to show him what I was truly capable of. I took a deep breath, grabbed my planner, and started drafting a plan. This time, I wasn't the quiet sister in the corner. I was Jessica. Strong, capable, and unstoppable. And when Brandon and Patricia's wedding teetered on the edge of disaster, I would be the only person who could save it. I arrived at my parents' suburban Atlanta home the next morning, my heart racing. It was strange how a place that had once felt comforting now seemed charged with tension. The driveway was immaculate, the oak trees casting long shadows on the freshly mowed lawn, but inside, the atmosphere was heavy. Mom was pacing in the living room, her hands wringing a dish towel. Dad sat stiffly in his recliner, jaw tight, reading over a pile of bills Brandon had left behind. And there he was, Brandon, sitting at the dining table with his head in his hands, looking smaller, weaker, and more vulnerable than I had ever seen him. When he finally lifted his head and saw me, relief flickered in his eyes. "Jessica," he said, voice hoarse. "Thank you for coming." I crossed my arms, leaning against the doorway. "So, what happened?" He swallowed hard. "Patricia. She found out about the lies." "Lies," I repeated flatly. "Yes." He looked down, shame filling his expression. I told her I had savings. I told her I'd paid for the venue and most of the wedding myself. I said I had a promotion at work. None of it was true. I had expected him to try to deflect blame. But he didn't. And you think she's going to forgive that? I asked, my voice low. I don't know, he admitted. She called off the wedding temporarily. Her family is furious. They're threatening legal action if the contracts aren't fulfilled. And the vendors, they've all cancelled. I don't know what to do. I pinched the bridge of my nose, trying to keep my temper in check. Months of pent-up frustration with him, years even, swirled in my mind. This was the same brother who had publicly humiliated me, yet here he was, begging me for help. Let me guess, I said. You told them I'm the only one who can fix this? His eyes widened. Yes. I felt a mix of disbelief and amusement. Brandon, the man who called me a failure in front of our entire family, had now advertised my competence to save his wedding disaster. He didn't know how much I had grown. I sighed and ran a hand through my hair. Fine, I said. I'll help. But there are conditions. Brandon nodded quickly. Anything. Anything you want. First, I said firmly, you will follow every instruction I give. No excuses, no interference, no arrogance. He winced but nodded again. Second, Patricia and her family must agree to let me handle this. They will, he said. I've already spoken to them. They'll accept if you're as professional as I told them you are. And third, I continued, you must apologize to me. Properly. No half-hearted words. You humiliated me once in front of everyone. I expect acknowledgement. Brandon's face fell, but he straightened, meeting my gaze. You're right. I was wrong. I am sorry, Jessica. I shouldn't have said those things. I shouldn't have humiliated you. You're not a failure. I was arrogant and stupid. I see that now. The weight of months of resentment lifted slightly. I nodded, keeping my expression neutral. Okay. Let's go meet Patricia's family. Patricia's parents, the Reynolds, were understandably cautious when I arrived. The spacious suburban home in Marietta exuded elegance, with pristine landscaping and a polished foyer. Mr. Reynolds, a retired attorney, and Mrs. Reynolds, a nurse manager, both gave me the kind of scrutinizing look reserved for strangers handling their family's most delicate matters. Patricia, seated at the dining table, looked exhausted but hopeful. I introduced myself politely. I'm Jessica, Brandon's sister and the event manager he recommended to help salvage the wedding. Mrs. Reynolds leaned forward, her gaze sharp. We've heard about your work, she said. We want full transparency. Every contract, every payment, every timeline. No surprises. No excuses. Can you do that? Absolutely, I said, meeting her eyes with calm confidence. I will provide complete documentation, maintain daily communication, and handle the vendors professionally. Brandon will follow all my instructions. Mr. Reynolds raised an eyebrow. And if he doesn't? He will, I said firmly. Or we won't proceed with the wedding. Patricia's eyes softened as she glanced at me. I just want to know that I can trust you, she admitted quietly. You can, I assured her. I'm here for you. Not for him. Not for anyone else. Only to make sure the process is honest and fair. After 2 hours of discussions and reviewing contracts, I was officially appointed as the new wedding coordinator. I was responsible for fixing every mismanaged aspect of the wedding, from vendors to venue logistics, catering, floral arrangements, and timelines. Brandon followed behind me like a nervous shadow, occasionally trying to speak up but quickly being hushed by my sharp glance. I could tell he was both relieved and terrified, realizing just how much work this wedding would take, and how dependent he had become on me. The following week was a whirlwind. I spent long days on site visits, checking every detail of the ceremony. I renegotiated contracts, recovered deposits, and worked with vendors who were initially skeptical of Brandon's ability to pay or manage the event. I redesigned the timeline, coordinated rehearsal dinners, and even developed contingency plans for emergencies. Through it all, Brandon watched silently. He made occasional suggestions, but I politely reminded him that decisions were mine to make. Slowly, he realized that being charming wasn't enough. Experience, preparation, and discipline were what saved events, and Patricia's trust, not charm or ego. Patricia herself began to observe. Quietly, she started asking questions about the workflow, budget, and vendor management. She was impressed by the thoroughness and professionalism I brought to the table. Brandon, in comparison, looked small and out of his depth. It was during this time that I had a private conversation with Patricia. She invited me for coffee at a local cafe in Decatur. Her demeanor was calm, but her voice trembled slightly as she explained, "Jessica, I need to be honest. I'm thinking about postponing the wedding." My eyebrows rose. "Why?" "Because even with all the work you're doing, I still see moments where Brandon's old habits surface," she said. "Defensiveness, avoidance, immaturity. I love him, but I need to be sure this is the right decision." I listened carefully. She was not acting out of anger or spite. She was evaluating him, and herself. "Then you need to tell him the truth," I said gently. "You deserve honesty, and he deserves a chance to correct his mistakes fully, not just put on a show." Patricia nodded, tears forming in her eyes. "I'm scared," she admitted. "I don't want to hurt him. But I also don't want to marry someone who isn't ready for the responsibility of a lifetime together." "That's courage," I said. "And honesty. Both are more important than any wedding date or party." When Patricia finally spoke with Brandon, it was painful. She told him she needed time. That the wedding could not proceed until he proved consistency, responsibility, and maturity. He listened quietly, occasionally flinching, but he didn't argue. For the first time, he had to face the consequences of his actions, and he could no longer rely on charm or deception. Later, he called me, "Jessica. I never realized how much I've taken for granted," he said, voice trembling. "You've done all of this, for me, for her, for everyone. And I don't know how to thank you." I replied calmly, "You don't need to thank me. I helped because it was the right thing to do. And you needed to learn. The hard way." He paused. "I see that now. And I'll do better." Months passed. The wedding remained postponed, but Brandon and Patricia continued dating, slowly rebuilding trust. He changed in ways I had hoped he would, showing genuine responsibility, honesty, and respect. And I had proven to myself, and to everyone else who doubted me, that I was not a failure. The final victory came during a Sunday family lunch. Brandon stood at the table, clearing his throat. My heart skipped a beat. This was the same man who had humiliated me. But this time, his tone was different. "I want to say something," he began. His eyes met mine. "Jessica has shown me what strength, integrity, and intelligence really look like. She saved my wedding, not by fixing the event itself, but by forcing me to confront my own shortcomings. I am proud to call her my sister." Applause erupted. Mom and Dad cried. Cousins and aunts whispered in awe. And me. I smiled quietly. Because the last word had always been mine. Not through revenge. Not through humiliation. But through growth, strength, and undeniable competence. For once, I was not the family failure. I was the family hero. After the Sunday lunch, things began to settle, but my work wasn't finished. The postponed wedding meant I now had a unique position, not just as the planner, but as the bridge between Brandon and Patricia, between honesty and deception, and between chaos and control. I spent the next weeks mapping out a full reconstruction plan. The first step was auditing every contract. Vendors had been confused, some deposits lost, others refused to work with Brandon because of unpaid fees. I contacted each one, calmly explaining that I was taking over management, handling all finances, and ensuring clear communication going forward. Some were skeptical at first, but when they realized I meant business, they agreed to return. Brandon tried to interfere at first. He wanted to call the caterer directly, renegotiate with the florist, and handle the photographer himself. Each time, I stopped him gently but firmly. "Brandon, step back," I said. "If we follow a plan, this can succeed. If you insert chaos, it will fail. You've learned the hard way, trust me now." He nodded reluctantly, eyes downcast. I could tell he was beginning to understand just how much effort it took to manage an event like this. For the first time, he wasn't the charming golden child. He was a man out of his depth, and that humbled him. Meanwhile, Patricia observed quietly. She didn't speak much during meetings but watched closely. She asked the right questions about budget, timelines, and vendor reliability. I could see her forming her own judgments about Brandon, whether he would follow through consistently or slip back into old habits. One afternoon, she called me aside at the dinner rehearsal. "Jessica," she whispered, "I still have doubts. Even with your help, I don't know if Brandon has really changed." I nodded. "Then give him a test," I said. "Set small expectations, observe him. If he follows through, he deserves another chance. If not, you save yourself a bigger heartbreak later." Patricia smiled weakly. "I wish it were that simple." "It never is," I said softly. "But honesty and boundaries always help." The next critical moment came when the vendors were scheduled to visit the venue for a full walkthrough. Brandon was nervous. He had tried to prepare, but no amount of charm could replace planning, logistics, and attention to detail. I arrived first, checking the sound system, flower placements, seating arrangements, and catering setup. Brandon arrived late, carrying a folder with random notes, clearly unorganized. "Jessica, can we talk about the flowers?" he asked. I glanced at the vendor's arrangement and shook my head. "Brandon, this has already been confirmed. Please don't interfere. Trust me. You're here to observe, not to control." He hesitated, then nodded. I could see the shame in his posture, a reflection of months of reckoning. Patricia arrived next, dressed casually but elegantly. She greeted me warmly and glanced at Brandon. He smiled nervously, unsure of her reaction. "Jessica," she said quietly, "thank you for doing all this. I don't think he would have been able to handle it alone." I smiled. That's what sisters are for. Over the following week, I coordinated multiple meetings with vendors, ensured deposits were paid, and revised timelines. Brandon attended every meeting but spoke only when prompted. Each day, he became more aware of the effort behind the events. Slowly, he began to internalize the lesson. Responsibility was more than words or charm. Patricia's trust in him grew, but slowly. She asked pointed questions, expecting honesty, and Brandon answered each truthfully. Sometimes, he stumbled. Other times, he shined. But she was watching, measuring each step, seeing if consistency would stick. One evening, as we reviewed the final floor plan at the venue, Patricia pulled me aside. "Jessica, can I ask you something personal?" "Of course. How did you manage all this? And still keep your composure? Brandon humiliated you, yet here you are, professional, organized, and calm." I took a deep breath. Because I realized something. You don't let other people define your worth. Brandon tried to humiliate me to feel bigger. I let him for a moment, and then I decided I would prove myself. Not for him, not for anyone, but for me. That's how I managed. Focus, strategy, and control. She nodded slowly, impressed. I hope Brandon learns that. He is learning, I said, watching him at the other end of the room. He was reviewing a seating chart, focused, serious, and genuinely trying. And if he keeps it up, you'll see a man who can grow from his mistakes. The turning point came 2 weeks before the rescheduled wedding. Patricia asked Brandon to meet her at the cafe where we had first spoken privately. She needed to be sure he was ready, not just for the wedding, but for a lifelong commitment. I wasn't present, but Brandon called me afterward. His voice was unsteady. She told me I need to prove consistency, honesty, and maturity, he said. Not just for the wedding, for her family, for myself. And I have to start now. Good, I said. This is exactly what you needed to hear. And you can do it, but only if you continue to follow the plan, keep communication open, and listen. He paused. I've never had to face my mistakes like this before. But I want to be a better man. I want her to trust me fully. And I don't want to disappoint you again. You won't, I said softly. Just remember, this isn't about impressing me. This is about being honest and responsible. Do it for her, and do it for yourself. Months passed. The postponed wedding remained the focus, but the real transformation was in Brandon. He was calmer, more thoughtful, and genuinely attentive to both Patricia and me. Patricia watched, questioned, and slowly rebuilt trust. Then, the final rehearsal arrived. Every vendor in place, the ceremony route confirmed, seating charts finalized. Brandon stood next to Patricia, looking nervous but ready. He turned to me. Jessica, he whispered, thank you for everything. You didn't just save the wedding. You saved me from myself. I smiled quietly. You did the work. I just guided you. Patricia looked at both of us, tears forming. I trust him now, she said softly. And I trust you, Jessica. Thank you for showing me who really cares. It was a quiet victory, the kind that leaves no room for arrogance, humiliation, or past mistakes. The work we had done had transformed relationships, personalities, and understanding. And when the wedding day finally arrived, Brandon stood beside Patricia, calm, prepared, and ready to commit with honesty and integrity. The last time he had stood at a family event and humiliated me, it was all arrogance. Now he stood with humility and respect, not just for Patricia, but for me. The morning of the rescheduled wedding arrived like a quiet storm. Atlanta's sun poured through the large windows of the Reynolds backyard, warming the freshly mowed lawn where the ceremony would take place. White folding chairs lined up neatly along the aisle, flowers arranged in pastel perfection, and soft strings of music drifting through the air. Every detail was in place. Every vendor coordinated. Every last panic-inducing problem solved. By me. Brandon stood beside Patricia, nervously adjusting his tie. I watched him from across the lawn, clipboard in hand, making sure the caterers were in position, the photographer knew the schedule, and the bridesmaids understood their cues. He glanced at me, eyes wide, and whispered, Jessica, thank you. I wouldn't have made it without you. I smiled quietly. You did the work too. I just made sure it didn't fall apart. Patricia approached me moments later, her makeup flawless and her eyes shimmering with both excitement and calm. I trust him, she whispered. And I trust you. Thank you for being the person he needed, and the person I needed to see him become. I nodded, feeling a mix of pride and relief. Months of planning, negotiations, and lessons in responsibility had led to this moment. The person who had once humiliated me, my brother Brandon, had grown in ways I could not have imagined. The ceremony began. Guests arrived on time, smiling, chatting, and complimenting the meticulous setup. My parents watched from the front row, a mixture of pride and awe on their faces. Mom leaned over to whisper to me, "Jessica, I had no idea you were capable of handling all this." I simply smiled and shook my head. Years of being underestimated can teach you a lot. Brandon approached the altar, taking Patricia's hands in his. His eyes were steady, his posture firm. He spoke his vows with sincerity and clarity, acknowledging not only his love for Patricia but his shortcomings and the lessons he had learned. Patricia's eyes glistened with tears as she responded, promising honesty, patience, and commitment. For a moment, everything else faded, the tension, the past mistakes, the months of chaos, and all that remained was the quiet strength of two people determined to start anew. I watched from the side, clipboard forgotten, heart swelling. I realized something. I hadn't just saved a wedding. I had saved growth, integrity, and the possibility of a healthier future for both of them. After the ceremony, the reception was held in the same backyard, under twinkling string lights. The catering was perfect, the music lively, and the atmosphere warm. Families mingled, laughter echoed, and the previous months of tension seemed like a distant memory. Brandon approached me once more, nervously holding a glass of champagne. "Jessica," he said quietly, "I know I humiliated you in front of everyone months ago. I don't expect forgiveness, but I want you to know. I've learned. I've changed. And I owe you more than I can ever repay." I placed a hand on his shoulder. "You don't owe me anything," I said. "You owe it to yourself to keep growing. That's more important than any apology or repayment." He nodded, swallowing hard. "I will. I promise." Later that evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and the string lights glimmered against the darkening sky, I found a quiet moment with Patricia. She smiled, tears in her eyes. "Jessica, you didn't just fix the wedding. You fixed him, in ways I couldn't have done. Thank you." I shook my head softly. I didn't fix anyone. I guided him. But he chose to learn to change. That's all him. She hugged me, a gesture of gratitude and recognition. "You're amazing," she whispered. "Truly amazing." By the end of the night, the chaos and uncertainty that had haunted the previous months felt like a distant memory. The wedding had not only survived, but it had thrived. Brandon had proven himself capable of responsibility and honesty. Patricia had regained confidence in their relationship. And I had found the strength that had been underestimated for far too long. As we cleaned up the reception, my parents approached me. Mom's eyes were glistening. "Jessica," she said softly, "you were incredible. I don't think I've ever been prouder." Dad nodded in agreement. "You proved everyone wrong, including Brandon. You handled everything with grace, professionalism, and intelligence." I smiled, quietly letting their words settle. It wasn't about proving them wrong anymore. It was about proving myself right. About showing that resilience, competence, and quiet strength could overcome humiliation and doubt. In the weeks that followed, life returned to a calmer rhythm. Brandon and Patricia continued their relationship with a newfound foundation of honesty and respect. I continued growing my career as an event manager, taking on larger and more high-profile clients. My reputation soared. People began to see me not as the quiet sister, not as the family failure, but as someone capable, decisive, and unshakable. Every now and then, Brandon would call, asking for advice on work or life, and I would guide him, not out of obligation, but because he had earned the respect and trust he had once squandered. The final moment of closure came during a family gathering, months after the wedding. Brandon stood at the head of the table, this time not to humiliate, but to acknowledge. "Jessica," he said clearly, "I want everyone here to know something. She is the strongest, most capable person in this family. Without her, this wedding would have failed. And I would have failed too. Thank you, Jessica, for saving me, Patricia, and the day we all will remember forever." Applause erupted. Cousins cheered. Parents smiled proudly. Even some of the relatives who had doubted me clapped, their faces filled with surprise and admiration. I smiled quietly, letting the moment sink in. Not because of the recognition, but because it finally felt like justice had been served in the purest way, through growth, integrity, and undeniable competence. No revenge was necessary. No humiliation was needed. I had proven that sometimes, the best way to win is not by fighting, but by showing strength when it mattered most. And in that moment, I realized, I was not a failure. Never had been. And no one, not even Brandon, could ever make me feel that way again.